Excuse me for extending my feet. I'm still nursing this knee. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. We have now reached the 101st Hikma, the 101st Aphorism of the Blessed Collection, Al-Hikam al-Ata'illah, from the great Imam Ibn Ata'illah al-Iskandari, rahimahullah ta'ala. وَنَفَعَنَا بِهِ. This great work that lays out for us these very important principles of the spiritual path. And these aphorisms touch something very deeply placed in our hearts. They affect us at a very deep level of our being. And we find in them solutions even at the very basic level, even for those that aren't actively traveling the spiritual path the way they should, to many of the problems it is that we face as human beings. And our understanding of that as believers is that ultimately the most important dimension of health is spiritual health. It's the health of the ruh and the qalb. And the more that the ruh dominates the heart, the healthier the heart will be. The more that the qalb is polluted by the nafs, is that the more detached it will be from the ruh, the spirit. So the heart is the battleground. And then to the degree of the influence of the nafs is to the degree that the ruh is covered up. To the degree that the ruh dominates is to the degree that the nafs is that put in its proper place and tamed. And so this is what we want. We want that our spirits to dominate our physical bodies. And so he gives us these great principles for you and I to be able to put into practice. So the 101st aphorism states, متى أوحشك من خلقه فاعلم أنه يريد أن يفتح لك باب الأنس به. And so Dr. Muhammad Rustam's translation of that is, when Allah estranges you from His creatures, it is because He wants to open the door of intimacy with Him. And so in an age of unprecedented interconnectedness, we have unprecedented loneliness. And so in an age of that deep loneliness and deep-seated alienation, as that this hikmah and aphorism is very important. And not to say that there's not other things that we can do at the surface level to help people that are lonely, but this frames it in the right way. And ultimately, that if someone does not believe in Allah, and if someone is not actively traveling the spiritual path, is that they are much more susceptible to becoming lonely in the negative sense of the word. And so this could be summarized simply as the wisdom of being estranged from creation. We'll explain some of these terms because they might not even be familiar to us even in English. So one of the key words here is awhashaka. And essentially he juxtaposes that wahsha to uns. And that wahsha is loneliness, estrangement, or you could even say alienation. And when he says here, awhashaka, Allah is the one who puts you in this state of wahsha, of loneliness, let's just simply call it here, or estrangement. And there's a wisdom, there's a reason. So meta here is that whenever Allah does this, mata awhashaka, so whenever Allah estranges you or that causes you to be lonely, there's a wisdom. And so the Arab would say that awhashad makan, yani aqfara dhahaba anhu nas. It means that a place has been deserted. A particular place has been deserted, i.e. there's no people there. They've left it and abandoned it. Or you would say, awhasha fulanan, a causative form here. It requires a direct object. A ja'alhu yastohish. This is to make someone feel lonely or to estrange. So when we use this word estrange in English, is that we would say that this is to cause someone to no longer be close or affectionate to someone. So someone has been pushed away when we speak about in the level of human beings. And then if we use this word alienate, which is closely related to it, it's a synonym, is it's to cause someone to feel isolated. They've alienated someone, i.e. they've isolated them. And that person then feels left out, isolated, so forth. And so, on one hand, we have this word, ohashaka. So Allah is whenever He estranges us from His khalq, from His creation, and it refers to people here, fa'lam, then He gives us a fil amr, no. And rhetorically, that causes us to listen very closely to what is being said. Fa'lam, no. Know that what? Annahu yurid, that He, Allah, with a capital H, wants. Wants what? And yaftaha laka. Fataha, of course, is to open. To open for you bab al-uns. Bab is a door, and uns is the opposite of wahsha. Uns is intimacy, familiarity. So that someone who's alienated doesn't have good relationships with people. They feel lonely. Someone's saddened by not being around people. And it could also be to miss someone badly, to have an aversion towards someone, whereas intimacy is the opposite. It's sociability, it's familiarity, it's intimacy. So know that Allah wants to open the door of intimacy with Him. So this word, anasa ya'nisu or anisa ya'nisu, both are that valid ways to speak of the trilateral root. It's to like someone's company, to like to be together with someone. So interestingly, is that this is one of the meanings behind the root word for insan, which refers to humankind. And you can speak of humankind without referring to gender. When you say insan, that refers to humankind, both males and females alike. And as human beings, is that we have this very important dimension to us, is that we're social creatures. And you all and I know how it's so hard to be alone. We learned that from the past several years, is that when we don't have what we think are just normal interactions, and we sometimes don't realize how important those interactions are, even just how are you doing, greeting someone, just seeing people, just small talk, things of this nature. Oh, it's not that important. But then when it's removed from, like, oh my God, you realize how important it really is. And some of us know the feeling of being in one place and having to move. You had to leave your friends, and now you have to start all over again. And then, or that, going somewhere for an extended period of time, and you're away from your particular area. The feelings that are associated with that, of being a stranger, of just passing through somewhere else, where you don't have people that you are close to and that have that intimate conversation with. So as human beings, that as a human need, this is something that is very, very important. Now, of course, when he's speaking of it here, he's speaking of it in the spiritual path. And while it is absolutely essential that we understand concepts like these, and like as believers, we should be very concerned about all people, Muslims and non-Muslims alike, in the problem of loneliness. And in a very real way, do everything that is we can as individuals, as families, as communities, to help with this problem and to help give people a sense of belonging. This is one of the most noble things you can possibly give someone. And it's one of the most neglected things of all that people fail to actually give. Giving people a sense of belonging. All people ultimately long for a sense of belonging. And you start to realize is that at the surface level, people say that they come somewhere or move somewhere for A, B, or C. But oftentimes at the very depth of their being, maybe in ways that they don't even realize, they're really seeking a sense of belonging. And they will disproportionately seek that with different types of people that they see are the people that are that at the core of wherever it is that they've moved to, or that wherever it is that they are spending time with people. And so it is of the utmost importance. And from here that we can understand so many different narrations of our Prophet ﷺ and things that he tried to do to create bonds in society. And so many things that he warned us of. Because when you do these things, that it divides people. And so this is really serious. And we should take it very serious. And you and I should be people who that allow ourselves to be befriended and befriend others. That this is the way that the believer is. And our Prophet said about the one is La khayra fi man la ya'laf wa la yulaf. There's no good in someone who does not befriend others or allow himself to be befriended. So again, the way we carry ourselves, this is a responsibility to make people feel that they're a part of something, that they are that connected. And we should do this with all of humanity, and of course, that especially with believers, and especially with believers that are like-minded and closer to you in a physical sense, and so forth and so on. So when he's speaking of it here, though, he's speaking of it in the spiritual sense. And this is why it is so deep. Because there's something, if we say that sociability is very much a part of being a human being, and there's something very deep that we are seeking with other people and through the relationships that we have with them. Even deeper than that is what you and I are seeking by virtue of our ruh, our spirit, and its desire to be connected to the Lord of the heavens and the earth. That's actually the deepest part of the human being. And the way that you and I long for our true home. In this world, we always will have nostalgia and long for where it is that we came from. And there is, when we say that loving from where you're from is from faith. Right? It's from Iman to love where you're from. Because this is where you grew up. And you and I all know when we go to where we grew up, the streets, the trees, the smells, the things that we see, all these things trigger experiences. They trigger that different things that we experience and so forth. And sometimes not the best thoughts, other times that great thoughts. But the point here is that what we really long for as human beings is our true homeland, which is the divine presence. From the day of Alastu bi Rabbikum, when we're standing before Allah, every human soul, whether they realize it or not, is longing and will always be aching until it returns home. And home is in the divine presence. That's home for the human being. In other words, no matter what it is that we do to try to fulfill ourselves, we'll never truly be fulfilled unless that void is filled. And that can only be filled through true religion from a true prophet and from the teachings of our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, because his teachings abrogate any other previous religions. Is that this is where you and I have to learn the principles that we then follow, where we attain this reality and thus fulfill our purpose here on earth. This is the most important thing of all. Before family, before career, before all of these other things. Rather, we have to see all of these other things in our life from this perspective. And embark upon all the other things that we do in our life in order to achieve this reality. This is what life is all about. And the more that we talk about it, the more we think about it, the more we work towards it, the better. And this, inshallah ta'ala, is the hope, is that we will live in a way where we will start to truly fulfill our purpose here on earth, which is nothing other than coming to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then have planted the seed now, and then harvest the eternal benefits in the hereafter. So this is what he is talking about here in this blessed aphorism. How you and I can really find our true home, which is in divine presence. And so, undoubtedly, in life, we will have challenges of different sorts, especially when it comes to people. I've never met a person that has never had an issue with another person. Every single human being has issues with other human beings to various degrees. We're human beings. And there's people that are like oil and water. They just simply don't mix. There's people that just are going to clash. And then the converse is true. That there's people who will just come together and you feel like you've known them forever. And you've only known them for a short period of time. This is the nature of the world. And we actively don't want to harm anyone. We don't want to that put anyone off. We want to give everyone their rights. But you can't be best friends with everyone. There's a wisdom, and they've done studies on this, that if you look at the vast majority of people, that their closest friends as opposed to their friends as opposed to their acquaintances. You know, there's estimates of the average people, how many very close friends they have. It's usually only a few people. And then they might have, something 100 plus other friends. And then acquaintances might be in the few hundreds, people just they know. But very few people you're actually truly, really close to. And that's fine. This is just the way things are. So we can't expect to be super close to every person. And we should be thankful in our time if we even have a single person that we can be close to, let alone 2 or 3. That's a great blessing. We should be thankful to have friends. And the key here is not to force things. If your relationship with someone is really like a 6 or a 7 out of 10, don't try to make it a 9 or you might lose the relationship. And don't underestimate it and act like it's a 3 or 4. Be real. And don't have what's called takalluf. Don't try to force things. Let things happen naturally. But when we go through life, there will be situations where Allah estranges us from His creatures, from His creation. And there'll be times of our life at different levels where we will start to question our relationships, where we'll have a sour taste in our mouth because of something that someone did or something that someone said or something that happened. It could be at work, it could be within the family, it could be in the community. This is very possible. So how should you and I read that natural happening? Natural meaning that this is from the sunnah of Allah that happens in creation. This is where we need religious principles. There will be people that it leads them to get angry. Worse yet, to get violent. There will be people who it leads to depression and it leads to a whole bunch of other things. But for religious people, if we see that happening, again, there's various degrees of this. The more spiritual degree of it is that we start to be aware of human frailty and human limitations. That's actually a very Nurani perspective, where you start to realize, like, I'm putting too much in my relationships and what I'm seeking from them. Yes, we're not saying not to have relationships, but sometimes we can have too high of expectations and want to get something from them. Spiritually speaking, you shouldn't really be seeking. Because in reality, only Allah can help you. In reality, only Allah can help you. And again, it doesn't mean that you can't have an outward form of help from people. Of course you can. But there's a big difference between placing all of your eggs in that basket and having higher expectations than you really should. The spiritual perspective, why we take the outward means, is more of having realistic expectations that what I'm really seeking, only Allah can give me. And then once you're enriched with that meaning, then all of your relationships then take on another meaning. And in fact, is that they'll actually be much stronger than before, much more real than before, because they're for Allah, not for your nafs. And when we say that we only love for the sake of Allah, it doesn't mean that there's not love. No, that love that we have for the sake of Allah is actually more powerful, more beneficial than love that we have that stems just from our nature or our own selves, our nafs. So this is really deep. If we're put in this situation where Allah Ta'ala is starting to estrange us from creation, we're feeling a sense of loneliness, a sense of alienation. We might feel that we've been abandoned, or that we've been left behind, or deserted, or isolated. Is that you and I should immediately see this as being from Allah. And Ibn Ata'illah is very careful in his words. So when he says that awhashaka, Allah is the fa'il of this. He is the one who estranged you. But again, is that when you and I go through things that at the surface level is evil, it's not something that's tasteful to the human being. No one wants to be lonely and estranged. The reality is that there's a wisdom behind it. So it's outwardly in the form of something that seems to be evil or bad, but it's batin, its true reality is that it's good. For the believers who see it as being from Allah. So, when this happens, and we're having potential, and this is one way that it manifests, problems with other people, is that we become disillusioned with many of our relationships, or the way that the community is treating us, or whatever it might be. Is that fa'lam? This is where we have to know. Fa'lam. Again, it's an amr. Know. And that this is a rhetorical device to alert us, to wake up, to not just let ourselves interpret it based upon our nafs, based upon our own limited understanding of this world in which we live. No, connect it to the doer of all things, which is ultimately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Annahu yurid. He wants. Allah wants. When He's putting you in this situation, if you see it as being from Him, and you have the ability to then do your part in response to it, and yaftah lak. Allah Himself wants to open for you Bab al-Uns bihi, the door of intimacy with Him. So, Sidi Ahmed ibn Ajiba, radiallahu anhu, let's read a little bit about what he says. Commenting on this blessed aphorism, هذه سنة الله تعالى في خلقه. The sunnah of Allah is the way that He normally deals with His creation. This is the way that Allah Ta'ala normally deals with His creation. إذا أراد أن يؤنس عبده بذكره. If Allah wants to make His servant find intimacy in His remembrance. And that's important to clarify here. When we say bab al-uns bihi, intimacy with Allah, it's not an intimacy like you and I when we touch another human being. This is an intimacy with the remembrance of Allah. So when we talk about intimacy with Allah, we're talking about intimacy at the heart level with the meanings of remembrance. Just as when we talk about closeness to Allah, proximity to Him. It's not a physical distance. This is a closeness of the heart. This is a closeness of the heart. When we talk about a hard heart, we don't really mean to go in there and the heart is actually really hard. No, it means that the heart is distant from these meanings. We're not feeling them. We're not aware of them because the heart is hard. And when the heart becomes soft, is that what we mean by that is that it's receptive and it can receive. We know that mercy is descending. We know that Allah is giving out blessings. But if we're not ready to receive that with our hearts, it's like rain that comes on the concrete here. This is why we have to put in these expensive drains, because it's not going to be soaked up by the grass and the foliage. It's just going to run right off. Right? But if you have nice, fertile soil, it absorbs. It absorbs. And this is how we want our hearts to be. So when Allah Ta'ala wants to make His servant find intimacy with His remembrance, وَيُتْحِفَهُ بِمَعْرِفَتِهِ, and to gift him knowledge of Him, أَوْحَشَهُ مِنْ خَلْقِهِ, Allah Ta'ala will make that servant of His estranged from His creation. Allah Ta'ala will cause this individual to move away. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't ever talk to people. but it means you start to separate yourself in your heart. And it could be for a period of time with some people that are taking the spiritual path seriously, or even others that are kind of taking the spiritual path seriously, is that you limit your interactions. And then for some people, no, there's periods of time where they are that in that higher degrees of seclusion. And then what happens as a result? وَشَغَلَهُ بِخِدْمَتِهِ. And then Allah preoccupies that servant of His to that serve Him through worship in all of the ways that we do this. Now look at what happens. There's some people who there's a period of their life where this starts to dominate their heart. And Allah takes them, and that makes them, that it's just not the same. You know, for them to go to that same Super Bowl party, or for them just to go hang out with the guys, or whatever it is that people do, or just spend time talking, is that it's not that you're antisocial, but it's like, it's just not the same anymore, right? And then if Allah Ta'ala preoccupies you then with His service and worship and remembrance, وَأَلْهَمَهُ ذِكْرَهُ, and He inspires him with His remembrance. If someone starts to take this path, then there's something that happens. حَتَّى إِذَا امْتَلَأَ قَلْبُ بِالْأَنْوَارِ, until that someone's heart becomes filled with spiritual light. وَتَمَكَّنَ مِنْ حَلَاوَةِ الشُّهُودِ وَالْإِبْصِبْصَارِ, and they become firmly rooted in the sweetness of divine witnessing, which is a very high degree. وَالْإِسْتِبْصَارِ رَدَّهُ إِلَيْهِمْ رَحْمَةً لَهُمْ, then Allah Ta'ala returns these great servants of His, right, to the people as a mercy for them. لِأَنَّهُ حِينَئِذٍ, because when someone that goes through this process of purification and they become grounded in the knowledge of Allah, then they go back to the people. But now, لِقُوَّةِ يَأْخُذْ مِنْهُ وَلَا يَأْخُذُونَ مِنْهُ, is that this person benefits them and is not impacted by them. And so he says is that an analogy that you can give outwardly is to think about that like a candle, for instance, and the light of a candle, the breeze that comes by just puts out the light of the candle, right? But if that light of that candle then that starts to touch things that are around it, and so that he says that would lead to, let's just say that you have now firewood started by that same flame, and that flame created a larger fire. And he says then as that fire, that if you would go beyond this, it would kind of get out into a forest or something like this, that once that the fire starts to become a raging fire, now when the winds blow, instead of blowing it out like the candle, now it actually spreads the fire more. So wind in the beginning, and here like the winds of tribulation, it's a metaphor for the winds of tribulation, will blow a candle right out. But when there's a raging fire, and the stronger the wind, the quicker the fire is going to spread. And here, the point of the metaphor is that it's not going to put the fire out. Right? On the contrary, someone will actually then benefit from all of those tribulations that it is that they go through. No. So when Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala puts the faqir, the aspirant, the one who is seeking close to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala in this state, it's because is that He wants us to find intimacy in Him. And He wants us to be sufficed and enriched وَيُغْنِيكَ بِمَعْرِفَتِهِ, at the depth of our being through knowledge of Him. And then He gives an example of the Prophet Muhammad himself, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And we know, as is in a hadith, that our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, before he became a prophet and a messenger, حُبِّبَ إِلَيْهِ الْخَلْوَةِ, or you could say al-khala, going into that حُبَّ إِلَيْهِ الْخَلْوَةِ, that solitude was made beloved to him. وَكَانَ يَخْلُ بِغَارِ حِرَاء, that he would go for extended periods of time and remain in solitude in that the cave of Hira. And that we know that the narration says, وَكَانَ يَتَّحَنَّث. Right? And they say simply, explain that, وَهُوَ التَّعَبُّد. He would be in a state of worship, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. What was the exact nature of the worship? I've heard it described in different ways in English, and Allahu alam, if that's the correct way to describe that worship. But the Prophet ﷺ will be in a state of worship, and it was in a state of solitude. And given that he's the best of creation, he's teaching us the way that it is for people who come after him. And for the vast majority of people, is that this is the type of thing that happens to them before they receive great openings. For the Prophet, it was wahi, before he received revelation from Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. That khalwa, being alone, was made beloved to him, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And we know that he would come back, and Sayyidah Khadija would give him provision, and he would go back. And this blessed place that on the mountain of light can still be visited to this day. And there was a spot where only one person can really worship in there, and you could actually see the Kaaba from that spot. So this is a very blessed place. This is where our Prophet ﷺ received the first revelation. But he says the wisdom of this, i.e. going into solitude before someone receives their opening for non-prophets, tasfiyat al-bawatin, is that where your heart is now being purified. Min ash-shawaghil wa shawaghib. You're being purified from things that preoccupy you. You're being preoccupied. You're being purified from all different types of things that trouble your heart. Why? لِتَتَهَيَّأْ لِقَبُولِ مَا تَتَحَمَّلُهُ مِنَ الْأَسْرَارِ وَالْمَوَاهِبِ. This is a necessary stage to prepare you to be able to receive that various secrets and gifts from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَإِذَا تَطَهَّرْتَ مِنْ أَقْدَارٍ مُلِئَ بِالْأَنْوَارِ. When we purify our hearts from all types of diseases of heart, from all types of that dirtiness at the heart level, our hearts will be filled with light. And so you have takhalli and tahalli. There's a process of purification where you're emptying the heart, where you are purifying the heart, and then the heart is adorned. And then what happens in it is فَأَشْرَكَتْ فِي شَمُوسُ الْإِرْفَانِ. And this is the whole goal, is that then the light of gnosis now shines in the heart. وَتَمَكَّنَ مِنْ حَضْرَةِ الشُّهُودِ. And then someone becomes firmly rooted in divine witnessing. That is the goal of life. Now, no one's claiming that. We're reading this so that we can at least know that this exists, and then we can start to take the path. And don't think just because you're young that this is not something that you can attain. There could be a young man or a young woman that hears this, and that there's things that open up for them in the path in a very short period of time, that which didn't open up to people that have been trying this for years or even decades. SubhanAllah. Or someone could have spent the majority of their life doing whatever, and then all of a sudden they come back. And Allah Ta'ala forgives them all of the past, changes their bad deeds into good deeds, and opens up the door for them. Khalas. And then there's people who start early, things open up for them, and then is that things are taken from them to determine how sincere they are, and they have a particular function to fulfill. And then those people might, at a certain time much later, that receive certain things. There's all different types of ways that people experience these realities. There's not one way that everyone experiences it. So different people go through different states. The most important thing is to not be attached to any particular way, to not be attached to any particular, you could call it way station, to any particular experience on the path. And to recognize that the goal is Allah. And to ask Allah to give you understanding of what you're going through in the moment. And even though sometimes if we had moments where things were good, where we might be seeing good dreams or might having good feelings, and we cease to feel like that at a certain time, if we look at our own selves and the things that we're doing, yes, rectify those things. But there could be other situations Allah has put us through to test us to see how we're going to act in relation to that. And then hopefully we pass that test, and it's likely that things will return to us in a much deeper way at a later time. So there's all different types of things that happen to different people at different stages. And this is why we need experienced people to help us, because sometimes it confuses us. That's why we need teachers. And just as when we get confused in school and you don't understand something and you're trying to, that's why you have a teacher there. Oh, no, okay, I get it now. And then you understand. And your understanding builds. As we travel the spiritual path. So he says, فَهَذِهِ سُنَّةَ اللَّهِ فِي أَوْلِيَاءِ وَأَصْفِيَاءِ. This is the way that Allah Ta'ala normally that deals with his awliya, those who are close to him, and his asfiya, these people that he's chosen. يَفِرُّونَ أَوَّلًا مِنَ النَّاسِ. They tend to flee from people in the beginning. حَتَّى يَحْصُلُهُم مِّنْهُمُ الْإِيَاسِ. Until that they despair from them. ثُمَّ يُرَدُّهُمْ إِلَى الْحَقِّ. ثُمَّ يُرَدُّهُمْ الْحَقِّ إِلَيْهِمْ. And then the truth, Allah returns them to him. رَغْبًا عَلَى أَنْفِهِمْ. Even if they don't want to go back. لِمَقَامَ الدَّلَالَ وَالْإِرْشَادِ. So that they can go back and help people. فَيَنْتَفِعْ بِهِمَ الْعِبَادِ وَتَحْيَا بِوُجُومِ الْبِلَادِ. So that then, is that the servants of Allah Ta'ala then benefit from them, and then that with their presence is that lands come to life. Entire regions come to life through these people. There is nothing more important on the face of this earth than these people. The awliya of Allah, those who are beloved to Allah. There is nothing more that we could do for Palestine or anywhere else on earth, or anyone else, or anyone going through any type of difficulty, than to attain wilayah. We need more people to become awliya of Allah. And the more awliya of Allah, the better everybody in existence is going to be. And then if we have that, and then take all the means outwardly, we're doing our part. And then we wait for the nasr. We wait for the victory of Allah Ta'ala. But if we're only taking the outward means and we're neglecting this, it's going to be limited. We're going to be left to the means. And if we're only focusing on this and we're then we're not having proper manners with Allah Ta'ala, what He's commanded us to do. Is that this is the foundation, i.e. our relationship with Allah, rectification of individual souls. And we combine with that, taking all of the means Allah has permitted for us outwardly, based upon true religion as interpreted by the great scholars in every generation. And we combine those two, then inshallah ta'ala, is that the faraj is qareeb. Relief will be near. But when we go to one extreme or the other, is that the benefits will be limited. And so that with these people, is that people benefit, and that lands come to life. Anyone knows that feeling? I remember being with Shaykh Marabat al-Hajj in the depths of the Mauritanian desert. This is as desolate of a place as you could possibly imagine. This is as far from civilization as you could. This is as far as it gets from civilization. 500 kilometers inland from the capital city. And it's just desert. Very few trees, very little vegetation, no electricity, no running water. Very simple means, simple food, simple, no vegetables. Dates, no bread. There was dates, but there's no bread, right? SubhanAllah. But when you are near Marabat al-Hajj, you don't feel like you miss anything. There was no loneliness. And I remember in the blessed city of Tarim, the only time that I used to get lonely was during the two Eids. When everyone else was with their family and you're just like hanging out with a few Western students because everyone else is with their family. Other than that, you never get lonely. No, I don't want to tell my mom that, make her feel bad, but that's the reality. Because you're around these people. These are the people that help your heart come to life, true life. You could literally have nothing in the middle of the desert. We used to wear our clothes for about 2 weeks until they became so dirty that you just couldn't stand how dirty they were. But you weren't worried about your clothes. It didn't matter. It was something much deeper. And from one person, al-badadatu min al-iman, that's for the Bedouin. Being disheveled is from belief. An-nadafatu fi iman, that's for the hadar. Those are for people of city dwellers. We should remain cleanly. It's almost ostentatious for people that live in the as Bedouins to be too concerned, because it's too hard to keep your clothes clean. Point is that your hearts felt alive because you have arifin billah amongst you. And this is the most fulfilling experience, to sit next to Marabat al-Hajj and to hear, as you hear Quran recited to him, you can just tell he's in a very powerful state. And you can tell because you know how your heart normally feels. You know how your heart feels when you're in his presence. The inshirah, the expansion of the heart, the beautiful ruhaniyah. And this is, you know it's not you, so you're not claiming anything for yourself. It's just their state bubbles over and you benefit from their presence. These are the true people of Allah Ta'ala. Al-Ghawth Abu Madyan says about them, this is in his qasida that matra is ma ladhat al-aish, is that tahya bikum kullu ardin tanziluna biha. Everywhere you go, the land comes to life. Everywhere, literally tanziluna, alight. Anywhere you alight. When you're traveling and you tanzil, and you alighted in a particular place. Everywhere you go, that land comes to life. And one time, one of the Salihin, Sahib Keshf, he was walking, and he just saw like light coming out of this home. He just witnessed a spiritual light coming out of this home. And he was just amazed. So he went and he inquired, like, who lives here? And then when he looked into it, he found that Imam Junaid had passed through this town and had stayed with this person for a period of time. Like, khalas, understood. From the barakah of his presence and his du'as and his prayers and him just physically being there, it remained filled with light. And then this is what brings the heart to life. كَأَنُّكُمْ فِي بِقَى الْأَرْضِ أَمْطَارُ. As if you are for the various lands of the earth rain. And so just as when rain comes, things come back to life. Khalas. Right? April showers, May flowers. And you see this no better way than in the deserts. When the rainy season comes, literally nothing is growing. And then all of a sudden, like in 2 or 3 days, all of a sudden, there's all this grass. SubhanAllah. وَتَشْتَهِ الْعَيْنُ فِيكُمْ مَنْظَرًا حَسَنًا. The eye longs and desires to look at something that is so beautiful. كَأَنُّكُمْ فِي عُيُونِ النَّاسِ أَزْهَارُ. As if you are to the eyes of people beautiful flowers. And they're more beautiful than flowers. وَنُورُكُمْ يَهْتَدِ السَّارِ بِرُؤْيَتِهِ. And your light, the one who is traveling, benefits just through seeing it. كَأَنُّكُمْ فِي ظِلَامِ اللَّيْلِ أَقْمَارُ. As if you all are like splendid moons that people are guided by at night. لَا أَوْحَشَ اللَّهُ رَبْعًا مِنْ زِيَارَتِكُمْ يَا مَنْ لَهُمْ فِي الْحَشَا وَالْقَلْبُ تِذْكَارُ. Is that may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never leave a place that's free, desolate, such that people never come to visit you. O you who are in my heart and soul, that constantly remembered. That's just a rough translation of these meanings. But this is indicating these true people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're the ones who bring us to life. And they're the ones that we want to establish a connection with. The amazing thing with them is you always long for them if you truly love them. But from the secret of ma'iyah, of togetherness, a spiritual togetherness with them, even if they're on the other side of this earth, is that you feel like they're with you. And you feel like you're there with them. Especially when the connection to them truly grows. And even if they return to Allah, there's people that feel like the Prophet ﷺ is with them, even though he returned to Allah 1400 plus years ago. And great imams of this religion throughout the centuries that might have lived 5, 7, 8, 900 years ago, as if they're living right here with you in this moment from the blessing of the spiritual connection. Subhanal Khalaq. These are the people that we really want to establish the most important relationships with. And we have all different other types of relationships with an array of different other people solely for his sake. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when Allah Tabaraka wa ta'ala estranges us from his creation, This is a sign that He wants to bring us close to Him, and that He wants us to find intimacy and in His remembrance, subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that we can become from those who are beloved to Him, tabaraka wa ta'ala. So, as I said, fatruk al-aghyar. What we're learning here from is that anything that disturbs or spoils the state of heart, you want to be wary of. Now, understanding that with our intellects is one thing. And the next time that we might be experiencing this, though, that's what we want. We want it to trigger what it is that we just learned. And then we go through the path of spiritual struggle until hopefully Allah Ta'ala will bless us to be a part of our reality. May Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq and bless us in all of our affairs. Ya Arhamar Rahimeen. May we be from those who Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala selects and makes us aware of these realities, and to teach us to read His signs in creation and to see everything as being from Him, and to that fill our hearts with the love of Him and longing to remember Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah open up the bab al-uns, the door of intimacy with Him, intimacy in the meanings of His remembrance. Ya Arhamar Rahimeen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.